What would you do if you returned home to find a stranger in your children's room? Queen Zillara's heart stopped the moment she saw him through the crystalline doorway, the human janitor kneeling beside her triplets' sleeping pods, his calloused hands hovering over her most precious treasures. Every instinct in her body screamed danger, and the bioluminescent markings along her pointed ears flared bright violet, a warning sign among her people that preceded either flight or fury. She'd been gone only 4 hours to attend the emergency council summit at the orbital station, 4 hours during which she'd trusted her palace staff to protect the 3 small lives that mattered more to her than her entire queendom. And now this human, this nobody who'd been hired just 3 weeks ago to clean floors and empty waste receptacles, was alone with them in the darkness. Zillara's hand moved instinctively to the phase blade at her hip, her mind racing through 1,000 terrible possibilities. But then she noticed something that made her pause. The janitor, whose name she vaguely remembered as Marcus, was crying. Not the silent tears of fear one might expect from someone caught where they shouldn't be, but deep, shuddering sobs that shook his entire frame as he whispered something too soft for her to hear. She should have called the guards immediately, should have had him arrested or worse, but something in that moment of raw vulnerability stopped her. And instead, Queen Zillara stepped silently into the nursery, her royal training, allowing her to move without sound despite the rage and fear coursing through her veins. "Step away from them," she commanded, her voice cold enough to freeze hydrogen, and Marcus jerked upright so fast he nearly fell, his face going pale as moonlight when he saw her standing there in full royal regalia, the quantum crown still flickering on her brow from the emergency session. "Your Majesty, I can explain," he stammered, raising his hands in surrender. But his eyes kept darting back to the middle pod, to her daughter Lissa, and that protective glance sent another spike of maternal fury through Zillara's chest. "You have 10 seconds to tell me why I shouldn't have you executed for treason," she hissed, moving between him and her children, her entire body now glowing with the defensive luminescence that made her people's skin look like starlight made flesh. Marcus swallowed hard, his plain brown eyes meeting her blazing silver ones with unexpected courage. "The middle pod was failing," he said quietly, each word careful and measured. "The bio-support system. There was a malfunction in the tertiary regulator. I noticed it during my cleaning rounds 3 hours ago. The alarm system. It had been disabled. Sabotage, actually. Someone cut the emergency relay to your personal communicator." The words hit Zillara like a physical blow, and she immediately spun to check Lissa's pod, her hands flying over the diagnostic panel with the practiced speed of a mother who'd spent countless sleepless nights monitoring these very systems since her triplets were born premature 6 months ago. The readouts confirmed Marcus's story. The tertiary regulator showed signs of deliberate tampering, and if it had failed completely, if the bio-support had crashed, Lissa would have had maybe 20 minutes before her underdeveloped respiratory system gave out. "Why didn't you alert the guards, the medical staff?" Zillara demanded, though her voice had lost some of its sharp edge as her fingers traced the makeshift repairs someone had performed on the failing system. "I tried," Marcus said, and she could hear the exhaustion in his voice now, the kind that came from hours of stress and fear. "But the communications array in this wing was also down, jammed by the same sabotage, and I couldn't leave because the regulator was degrading by the minute. I had to choose between finding help and maybe watching her die, or staying and trying to fix it myself." Zillara turned slowly to face him again, really looking at him for the first time since she'd entered the room. His janitor's uniform was stained with biogel and coolant, his hands were burned in several places from exposed circuitry, and his toolkit, a battered metal box she'd seen him carry throughout the palace, lay open beside the pod, revealing an impressive array of technical instruments far beyond what any cleaning staff would need. "You're not really a janitor, are you?" she asked, and despite everything, despite the fear and anger still pumping through her system, she felt a spark of curiosity. Marcus laughed, a broken sound without humor. "I am now, but 3 years ago I was the chief engineer on the colony ship Prometheus." Before it fell, the name sent a chill through the room. Everyone in the galaxy knew about the Prometheus, the human vessel that had attempted to cross the void sector against all warnings and had been lost with all 900 souls aboard. Or so the official reports claimed. "The reports said there were no survivors," Zillara said, carefully, her tactical mind already piecing together implications and possibilities. "The reports said a lot of things that weren't true, Marcus replied, his jaw tightening. 17 of us made it to the escape pods, and I spent 2 years drifting before a salvage crew found me. By then, my credentials were flagged in every system database, marked as deceased. And trying to resurrect a dead man's identity attracts the kind of attention I couldn't afford, not from the people who really destroyed the Prometheus. This sabotage, Zillera said slowly, her mind making connections with the cold efficiency that had made her a queen at 23, despite her youth. The same people? Marcus nodded grimly. I recognized the signature, the specific way the relay was cut, the type of virus used to disable the alarms. It's the work of the syndicate, the same group that killed 900 people just to cover up their weapons smuggling operation through the Void sector. I don't know why they'd target your daughter specifically, but that's their handiwork. I'd stake my life on it. Queen Zillera felt the world shift beneath her feet as pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known existed began falling into place. The unexpected technical difficulties that had forced the Emergency Council Summit to relocate at the last minute, the convenient communication failures that had kept her trapped in meetings for 4 hours instead of the scheduled 2, the casual suggestion from Council member Vex that she leave her children with the perfectly capable palace staff rather than bring them to the orbital station as she'd originally planned. Someone had wanted her away from the palace, had wanted her isolated and unable to respond when her daughter's life support failed, and she could think of at least 3 council members who would benefit politically from the tragic death of one of the royal heirs. Show me your hands, she commanded suddenly, and Marcus extended them without hesitation, revealing the burns and cuts from his emergency repairs. Among her people, there was an old ability, rarely spoken of in modern times, but still taught to the royal bloodline, a form of empathic resonance that activated through touch and allowed one to sense the deepest truths of another's heart. Zillera had never used it before, had considered it an archaic superstition from her grandmother's generation. But as she took Marcus's damaged hands in her own, she felt the familiar tingle of her people's ancient gift flowing through her pointed ears and down through her luminescent skin. The connection hit her like a starburst, and suddenly she wasn't just touching Marcus, but experiencing the last 4 hours through his memory and emotion. The moment of horrified realization when he'd noticed the failing regulator during his routine floor cleaning, the desperate sprint back to his quarters for his hidden engineering tools, the agonizing 3 hours spent rerouting power and rebuilding circuits with burned fingers while watching a child's life signs fluctuate on the monitors. And beneath it all, a deep well of grief for the children aboard the Prometheus he hadn't been able to save, children whose ghosts had driven him to risk everything to save just this one small life. Zillera released his hands and stepped back, her own eyes now burning with tears. She couldn't quite explain. You saved her life, she said simply, and the words felt inadequate for the magnitude of what could have been lost. I couldn't let another child die because I was too afraid or too slow, Marcus replied, his voice barely a whisper. Not again, never again. The vulnerability in those words cracked something open in Zillera's carefully constructed armor, the emotional walls she'd built since becoming a single mother and sole ruler after her mate's death in a border skirmish 2 years ago. She'd been so focused on being strong enough, strategic enough, untouchable enough to protect her children and her people that she'd forgotten what it felt like to share a burden, to trust someone else's strength alongside her own. The syndicate won't stop with one failed attempt, she said, shifting into tactical mode even as her heart was still processing the emotional whiplash of the last 10 minutes. If they're moving against the royal line, they'll have contingencies, backup plans, Marcus nodded, his engineer's mind clearly running parallel calculations. The sabotage was sophisticated, but not perfect, which means either they were rushed or they wanted it to look like an accident rather than an obvious assassination. My guess is the latter, which means they'll wait a few weeks before trying again, something different, harder to trace, unless we make them think their plan succeeded, Zillera said slowly. An idea forming with the dangerous clarity of desperation. Unless we announce that Princess Lys's condition has taken a turn for the worse, that she's been moved to an undisclosed medical facility for intensive treatment, and we use the time while they think they're succeeding to identify the traitors in my own council. That's risky, Marcus pointed out. If the syndicate has people in your inner circle, they might accelerate their timeline, go after you directly or target the other 2 children. Which is why I need someone I can trust. Absolutely, Zillera said. making a decision that went against every protocol and political calculation she'd been trained to follow. Someone who has nothing to gain from my family's death and everything to lose if the syndicate wins. Someone who just spent 3 hours saving my daughter's life when he could have walked away and let fate take its course. Marcus stared at her as if she'd started speaking in quantum equations. Your Majesty, I'm a dead man with a forged identity and a janitorial position. What exactly are you suggesting? I'm suggesting you become my children's personal guardian, Zillera said, her voice steady despite the enormity of what she was proposing. I'm suggesting I move you into the royal quarters, where you can monitor all their life support systems personally and where I can keep you close enough to trust. I'm suggesting we work together to find the traitors before they kill my family and destabilize the entire queendom. The silence that followed was broken only by the gentle hum of the sleeping pods and the soft breathing of 3 small children who had no idea their lives had hung in the balance tonight. You don't know me, Marcus finally said, but Zillera could see the war in his eyes, the desperate want to matter again, fighting against the fear of more loss. I know you burned your hands to save my daughter, she replied, stepping closer until they were sharing the same breath of recycled air. I know you carry ghosts that won't let you rest. I know you're brilliant enough to repair alien technology with human tools, and brave enough to risk execution rather than let a child die. In my experience, that's more than enough foundation to build trust upon. She held out her hand, not as a queen to a subject, but as one broken warrior to another. And after a moment that seemed to stretch across lifetimes, Marcus took it. His hand was rough and damaged and warm, and when their skin connected again, Zillera felt that same empathic resonance, but this time it flowed both ways, showing him her own depths, the crushing responsibility of leadership, the loneliness of widowhood, the bone-deep terror of raising 3 premature children in a political den of vipers, and the fierce, wild hope that maybe, just maybe, she'd found someone who could stand beside her in the darkness. I have one condition, Marcus said, his grip tightening slightly. Anything, Zillera promised, and meant it. When we find the people who did this, who killed the Prometheus, who tried to kill your daughter, I get to be there when we bring them down. Not for revenge, but for closure. Those 900 people deserve at least that much. We'll bring them down together, Zillera said, and sealed the promise with the formal words of her people. By starlight and sacred trust, I bind my fate to yours until this debt is paid, or we fall in its payment. Marcus's eyes widened as he recognized the weight of the ancient oath. The kind of bond that among her people was reserved for lifelong companions and battle partners. That's a queen's oath, he whispered. You can't just give that to someone like me. I just did, Zillera replied, allowing herself a small smile, the first genuine one in months. And for what it's worth, I don't think you're someone like anything. I think you're exactly who my family needs right now, who I need. And I didn't become queen by ignoring my instincts. Over the following weeks, as they worked together to unravel the conspiracy that reached higher into the council than either had imagined, as Marcus took up residence in the quarters adjoining the nursery and spent his nights monitoring biosigns while Zillera navigated the deadly political waters of her court, something unexpected bloomed between them. It started small, in the shared glances over the triplets' morning feeding, when little Lissa grabbed Marcus's finger with surprising strength. In the quiet conversations during the deep night hours, when Zillera would find Marcus awake and keeping vigil, and would sit with him rather than return to her empty royal bed, they discovered they both loved ancient earth poetry. That Marcus could make her laugh with his dry observations about the absurdity of court protocol. That Zillera's tactical brilliance meshed perfectly with his engineering logic to create strategies neither could have developed alone. The evidence they gathered painted a disturbing picture: 5 council members compromised by syndicate bribes. A plot that extended beyond simple assassination to a planned coup that would have installed a puppet government and opened the queendom's borders to weapons trafficking that would destabilize the entire sector. They built their case carefully, meticulously. And when they finally moved to arrest the traitors in a dramatic session of the High Council, it was Marcus's technical testimony about the sabotage signatures that sealed the prosecution's case. In the aftermath, when the conspirators had been sentenced and exiled, when the syndicate's local network had been dismantled and her children were finally truly safe, Zillera stood with Marcus on the palace balcony overlooking the capital city as twin moons rose over the horizon. The council is suggesting I should take a new mate, she said quietly, not looking at him. Someone politically advantageous, a union that would strengthen alliances. That makes sense, Marcus replied, his voice carefully neutral. It's what a good queen would do. I've spent my whole life doing what a good queen would do, Zillara said, finally turning to meet his eyes. And it's left me surrounded by people I can't trust, and alone in every way that matters. But then you came into my life. This impossible human who saved my daughter and helped me save my throne and somehow made me remember what it feels like to have a partner instead of just subjects and advisors. Marcus's breath caught, and she saw hope and fear warring in his expression. Zillara, I'm still just a man with a false name and a tragic past. Your people would never accept, my people will accept who I choose, she interrupted firmly, and I choose you, if you'll have me. Not because it's politically advantageous. Not because of some strategic alliance, but because when I think about the future, about growing old and raising my children, and ruling this queendom, the only version of that future that doesn't feel empty has you in it. She reached up to cup his face with her luminescent hand, her pointed ears glowing soft gold with the emotion her people could never fully hide. You told me once that you couldn't let another child die because you were too afraid or too slow. Well, I can't let this chance at happiness die because I was too afraid or too bound by protocol. We've faced assassins and conspirators together. I think we can handle whatever challenges come with a human engineer becoming the royal consort, Marcus laughed. The sound bright and genuine, and full of wonder, and when he kissed her, it was gentle and certain, and tasted like the future neither of them had dared to hope for. Your Majesty, he murmured against her lips, I think this is the most impractical, inadvisable, absolutely perfect decision you've ever made. Then you accept? Zillara asked, her heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with political intrigue or danger. I accept, Marcus said, and sealed it with another kiss as the twin moons climbed higher and the city below began to light with evening bioluminescence. On one condition, you stop calling yourself just a queen and start remembering you're also a woman who deserves to be happy. Deal, Zillara whispered. And for the first time since becoming a widow and single mother and sole ruler of a queendom, she let herself lean into someone else's strength. Let herself believe that maybe the universe had brought this impossible human into her life, not by accident, but by design. Months later, during the formal ceremony where Marcus was officially recognized as royal consort and adoptive father to the triplets, when little Lissa took her first steps and walked directly into his arms, Zillara caught his eye across the celebration hall and saw her own joy reflected back at her. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would always be political opponents who questioned her choice, always be remnants of the syndicate seeking revenge, always be challenges that tested them both. But as Marcus settled Lissa on his hip and reached out his free hand to her, as the triplets giggled and the court applauded, and the future stretched out before them full of possibility, Queen Zillara knew with absolute certainty that she'd made the right choice. Sometimes the most important thing a leader could do wasn't the politically expedient move or the strategic alliance. Sometimes it was simply opening your door to find a stranger in your children's room and choosing to see not a threat, but a miracle. Choosing to trust when trust seemed impossible. Choosing to believe that love could grow even in the spaces between stars and species. By starlight and sacred trust, she murmured, repeating the oath she'd sworn that first night. And Marcus smiled because he understood what she meant. Their story had begun with fear and suspicion in a darkened nursery, but it had transformed into something neither could have predicted. A partnership that had saved not just lives, but souls. A love that proved that sometimes the best things in life came from the moments when you chose courage over caution and heart over protocol.